If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, always expected to be strong, quiet, and selfless, this story is for you. I gave up too much just to be seen until the day I finally chose myself. Stay with me as I share what happened. If the story speaks to you, don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment below. Following, let me take you back to where it all began. If someone ever asked me, Leah, when did you realize you were the extra in your own family? I don't think I'd have an immediate answer. After all, how does a 7-year-old begin to understand the hollow ache of being quietly replaced? But I do remember the exact day that feeling took root. It was the day my little brother, Caleb, was born. Before Caleb entered the picture, life in Asheville, North Carolina, felt like something out of a watercolor painting. Soft, slow, and full of warmth. My dad used to read me classic adventure tales by lamplight while my mom carefully brushed my curls and told me bedtime stories about flying above the Blue Ridge Mountains. Every Saturday, Dad and I would hike Bent Creek trails, collecting pine cones and pretending they held secret magic. My preschool scribbles, misshapen suns, smiling stick figures, were taped proudly on the fridge like gallery pieces. I was the center of their little world. Then Caleb arrived, and slowly the light began to shift. I still remember my 8th birthday. I had wanted a purple bicycle with a little basket in front, something to ride down the quiet hill behind our house. I left hints everywhere. Doodles on my notebook, a catalog page pinned to my corkboard, even slipped a cutout into Mom's purse. On the big day, I opened each gift with anticipation. But inside every box were clothes and a beginner's reading set. I smiled politely, but something wilted inside. I asked about the bike. Mom gave me a soft smile and said, "Bikes are pricey, sweetheart. And besides, walking is healthier for a growing girl." 3 weeks later, they brought home a shiny red tricycle for Caleb. No birthday, no special event. Just because, as Mom put it, he needed help strengthening his coordination. I stood on the porch watching Dad show him how to pedal, crouching beside him with the kind of attention I hadn't seen in a long time. It wasn't jealousy I felt. It was something colder, like I had been quietly written out of the story. That was only the beginning. When I came home from school at 9 with a certificate for scoring highest in English class, I ran through the front door, proud and breathless. Mom glanced at it for half a second before saying, "That's great, Leah. But guess what? Caleb built a little dinosaur from his blocks today. Isn't that brilliant?" That evening, I sat on the stairs while they told the story of Caleb's plastic T-Rex as if it were a Nobel Prize. I wasn't angry, I was numb. I tried once to speak up, to say I wish they'd get excited for me sometimes too. Mom barely looked up from folding laundry. "Leah, you're the big sister. Be mature. Don't make a fuss over small things." And with that, I learned to swallow joy, sadness, and hope in silence. And so every feeling, joy, disappointment, confusion, was tucked away into a quiet, invisible drawer deep inside me. Over time, the favoritism didn't just linger, it sharpened. Caleb was allowed to slam doors, throw tantrums at dinner, and talk back without consequence. "He's just spirited," Mom would say, tousling his hair with a fond smile. But me? I was expected to be composed, polite, grateful. Always the understanding older sister, never the one who needed understanding. By 14, the lines were well drawn. Caleb was the center. I was the background. That fall, I got my first job. A part-time shift at a used bookstore nestled between a florist and a cafe on Montfort Avenue, just a short walk from home. The place smelled like worn paper and cedarwood, and for a few hours each afternoon, I breathed easier. I shelved novels, rang up customers, and swept the creaky floors with care. Every paycheck felt like a small step toward freedom. I had a goal, to save for a second-hand camera I saw listed at a local shop. Photography had become a quiet escape for me, a way to focus on beauty when the world around me made me feel invisible. That camera represented more than just a hobby, it felt like proof that I existed outside of my family's shadow. But my plans shattered within 3 weeks. One evening after a long shift, I came home to find Mom waiting in the kitchen. Her tone was syrupy, the kind she used when something unpleasant was coming. "Leah, your father and I were talking," she began. "We think it's wonderful that you're working. But Caleb really wants to take art classes and they're not cheap. Since you're earning now, we'd like you to help out. Half your pay should go to his enrollment fees." I stared at her, unsure how to respond. "I could help him at home," I said cautiously. "There are free tutorials online. I could even get him art supplies if that helps." But she cut me off, voice sharper now. "This isn't about you controlling how things are done. Don't be selfish. Families support each other. You should be proud to invest in your brother's growth. So I gave in. Every payday, I handed over an envelope with half my earnings. Supposedly for art classes. In truth, I watched as Caleb brought home wireless earbuds, a custom gaming mouse, and limited edition sneakers. Not once did Mom or Dad question him. That pattern became normal. Caleb borrowed anything of mine that he liked, my favorite hoodie, the earbuds I bought with the remaining half of my own money. I once saw him bragging about my things at school like they were his prizes. When I told Dad, he simply exhaled and said, "He's younger, Leah. He doesn't mean anything by it. Try to be patient." But inside, I wasn't patient anymore. I was quietly breaking. "He's still learning, Leah. He doesn't always think things through like you do," Dad said after the third time Caleb took something of mine without asking. "Try to be more understanding, okay?" Understanding. That word had started to feel like a chain. No matter how hard I worked, no matter what I sacrificed, understanding was the excuse used to push more weight onto my shoulders. My patience wasn't kindness, it was expected. My accomplishments weren't celebrated, they were dismissed as the minimum. Everything I achieved became a silent contract that I owed more. Somewhere between 14 and 17, I stopped being a daughter. I became a support beam. A quiet fixer. A cushion to soften every one of Caleb's mistakes. I didn't dream out loud anymore because in this house, dreams weren't for people like me. They were for the golden boy who could do no wrong. By the time I turned 17, the silence in my chest had hardened into armor. I didn't even flinch anymore when Mom gushed about Caleb's latest creative breakthrough, a messy painting he'd splattered together and sold for $15 on Etsy. Meanwhile, I was a senior at Asheville High, ranked top 3 in my class, working evenings at the bookstore and weekends editing photos for local clients. Every dollar I earned went toward a single goal, a used DSLR camera I'd been eyeing for months. Photography made me feel visible in a way my family never did. I'd roam through Riverside Cemetery or catch golden hour along the French Broad River, trying to trap beauty in a frame. In those moments, I was Leah. Not Caleb's sister. Not the fallback daughter. I kept my savings in a small tin box, hidden at the back of my closet under worn textbooks and an old blanket. That box was my hope, my freedom. Until it wasn't. One March evening after a long shift, I came home to chaos in my room. The drawer was jimmied open. Papers and clothes tossed carelessly. The box was gone. My chest tightened as I stumbled downstairs. Laughter floated in from the living room. "Pretty impressive, huh? Caleb saved up and got all this gear himself," Dad chuckled. "Shows initiative." I froze. There it was, new streaming equipment flashing under the TV. "That was my money," I said, voice shaking as I faced Caleb. He didn't even blink. "You're so dramatic. You'll make it back. It's not like your pictures are that important." Something inside me cracked. Not loud, but final. I looked at my parents, hoping, just once, for someone to say what Caleb did was wrong. But Mom only sighed, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Leah, hiding cash in your room like that? That's not how a responsible young woman acts. You should have trusted us to manage it. Caleb has real potential with this streaming hobby. As his sister, you should be his biggest supporter." Dad didn't even lift his eyes from the newspaper. "Money's just a tool," he muttered. "Family helps each other. That's how it's always been." Help? No. This wasn't help. It was control wrapped in guilt. This wasn't support. It was theft, brushed off with moral excuses like being a good sister. That night, I sat alone in the dark, hands resting on my knees. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply opened my laptop and searched for anything that would help me build a life beyond that house. I applied for an assistant position at a wedding photography studio on the outskirts of town. The job was physically demanding, setting up floral arches, managing lighting kits, editing hundreds of images until my eyes blurred. But I didn't care. Each long day was a step further from the suffocating silence at home. My routines changed. I left before sunrise and returned after dark. The kitchen was always lit, Caleb laughing about some new online follower, my parents nodding along as if he just published a best-selling novel. No one asked where I went. No one noticed the exhaustion in my eyes. And for once I preferred it that way. 1 week after turning 18, I left. No dramatic goodbye. No angry confrontation. Just a quiet Saturday morning. I packed 2 bags, grabbed the keys to a rented room above a florist in West Asheville, and walked out the door. Not a soul stopped me. Not even Caleb. That was the last morning I ever lived in that house. In the years that followed, I worked harder than I thought possible. By day, I was a photography assistant. By night, I took freelance editing jobs, weddings, graduation portraits, even real estate shoots. Weekends were reserved for events when I carried my own camera and finally shot under my name. I wasn't rich. I wasn't famous. But for the first time, I felt real. Everything shifted the day I displayed my work at a local art fair. Soft morning shots of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Close-ups of hands, of laughter, of quiet love. That's when he appeared, James. He didn't ask where I studied. He didn't critique my work. He simply looked at one photo, a morning mist curling over a porch, and said, "You make this town feel like a memory I forgot I had." James was a civil engineer, a few years older. He didn't rush me. He never told me to explain myself. He just stayed steady and kind. When I met his family, his mother hugged me at the door and asked, "Long trip, sweetheart?" I almost cried. Because no one had asked that before, not like that. Not like they meant it. She didn't ask about my grades. She didn't ask what I earned. James's mother simply looked at me with soft eyes and said, "Did you have a tiring drive, sweetheart?" That one sentence nearly undid me. It was the first time I'd been asked a question out of genuine care, not as a way to measure or compare. In that moment, something in me loosened like a knot I'd carried for years. 3 years passed. I built my own photography business, mostly wedding and portrait work. Word spread quietly, and eventually I had more bookings than I could handle alone. James helped me redesign my website. Some nights we stayed up editing together, sharing headphones, laughing over photos where someone's uncle had blinked at the worst moment. Then on a cold December evening, James and I were walking back from a late shoot near the Grove Arcade, snowflakes dusting our coats. We stopped under a soft amber streetlight just outside the library, and James knelt on the patch of brick sidewalk, holding out a simple silver ring. "Leah," he said, "I don't want you just behind the camera anymore. I want you beside me in every reel frame." There wasn't a single ounce of hesitation in my yes. But joy, as I had learned, always had to battle for space in my life. Word of our engagement reached my old family faster than I expected. Less than a week after James posted a quiet photo of us, no ring flaunting, no #storm, my mother called. This time, her voice carried no fake warmth. "If you're truly planning to cut out your own family from such a major event," she said coldly, "then I'll have to make adjustments to the inheritance. Caleb will be the primary heir." I almost laughed. Inheritance? The crumbling house they still hadn't paid off? Dad's aging sedan that needed a new transmission? Or the mounting credit card debt Caleb had racked up from impulsive purchases and failed projects? They thought those were bargaining chips. They still believed I wanted in on their tiny kingdom. The next day Caleb started texting. "You're seriously ungrateful. Mom and Dad raised you. Now you're just going to embarrass them like this. Who even has a wedding without family? That's pathetic." I didn't respond, but the messages kept coming, guilt, mockery, bait. Even old classmates chimed in. "I'm sure your mom means well," one messaged. "You'll regret it if they're not there." Family's still family. But none of them had lived inside that house. They didn't know what it felt like to be chipped away for years. James sat with me on those long nights. No lectures. No solutions. Just his steady hand wrapped around mine. "We'll invite the ones who truly love you," he said softly. "No one else." And that's when I knew I wasn't going to bend this time. A week before we sent the invitations, I got the message from Mom, "We need to talk. In person. No middlemen." I knew what middlemen meant. "James." He saw the message and simply said, "If you need to say everything once and for all, I'll go with you. But only if you want to." None of us touched the menus. The server came by, but we waved her off. The silence settled thick over the table, only broken when my mother finally spoke. "Leah," she began, her voice walking a line between disappointment and desperation, "why are you doing this? This should be the happiest time of your life, and instead you're turning it into a spectacle." I kept my posture still, my hands folded tight in my lap. "Because I wanted to actually be happy, Mom. Not forced. Not poisoned with expectations." My father didn't wait. "You're isolating yourself," he said sharply. "Be careful, Leah. You're making yourself a stranger to your own blood." James reached under the table and lightly touched my arm, a quiet nudge that meant, "Say what's true." So I did. I told them about the years they ignored my needs, the money I earned that disappeared into Caleb's whims, the silence I was forced to keep. I reminded them about the stolen camera, the one I saved for tirelessly, and how it had become a tool for Caleb's entertainment instead of my own dream. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just laid it out plainly, like the facts they'd refused to see. Mom kept fiddling with the paper napkin, eyes glued to her lap. Dad stared past me, out the window, as if waiting for this conversation to be over. Then for the first time in years, Caleb spoke. His voice was low, almost sarcastic. She's not lying. My mother's head jerked up. Caleb leaned back in his chair. Yeah, I took her camera. Not just because I wanted it. Because every time she did something right, it made me feel worse. Like no matter what I did, it wouldn't be enough. She was always winning. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even regret. Just a bitter confession too late to mean anything. I'm tired of being the one who has to shrink, I said quietly. I've spent years bending myself just to make this family comfortable. Mom jumped in, her voice suddenly soft and full of excuses. Caleb didn't mean to hurt you, sweetheart. He's just overwhelmed. Overwhelmed. Caleb was 24. And I knew that word well. It was their favorite cloak for irresponsibility. I stood slowly, the weight of it all finally too heavy to keep sitting. Then Dad surprised me. If this is about money, he said, voice hollow, we'll cover the wedding. You don't have to make this a fight. James gave my hand a supportive squeeze. I met my father's gaze. My wedding isn't something you can pay your way into. It's not a stage for forgiveness you never earned. Caleb stood suddenly, his chair scraping loudly across the floor. Fine. Go play perfect with your new life. But don't come crawling back when it all falls apart. His anger didn't sting. It clarified everything. As we left that cafe, I didn't feel like a daughter walking away. I felt like a survivor stepping into her own truth. But I was wrong about one thing. That meeting wasn't the end. Not even close. 3 days later, my mother showed up at my studio. No appointment. No call. Just her, flawless, polished, and simmering with control. She stood outside the studio door, immaculate as always, every strand of hair in place, her posture rigid. But her eyes were red, swollen in a way that suggested I had broken her spirit, not the other way around. Leah, she called, her voice trembling, come outside. We need to talk. I didn't move from behind the front counter. I'm working, I said evenly. If you need to say something, leave a message. But she wouldn't go. She stayed rooted at the door, gripping her structured handbag like it was holding her together. You can't keep avoiding your own family. We're still your blood. I stepped out from behind the counter, stopping just short of the doorway. I kept my tone measured, quiet enough for her but firm enough to be heard. Being family doesn't give you permission to violate boundaries. I've told you before. Respect works both ways. Behind me, the studio staff were clearly aware. A few tried to stay focused on their editing screens, but I saw the worried glances. My manager gave me a small nod, ready to step in. I think it's best you leave now, I added. If you don't, I'll have to involve building security. That made her blink. For the first time in my life, she actually backed away, not defeated, just stunned. She turned slowly and walked to her car. But I knew better than to believe that was the end. That night, my phone lit up like a signal tower. Calls from my aunt in Georgia. A cousin I hadn't spoken to since middle school. Even Dad's sister, who never liked me, left a voicemail. Don't be rash, Leah. She's still your mother. One day you'll wish she'd been there. And Caleb, of course, sent a voice memo full of his usual smugness. I told everyone you chicken out. Bet you don't even have the guts to go through with it alone. I'll be watching to see which strangers actually show up to support your little rebellion. I didn't reply. But James did. We're changing every login and password first thing tomorrow, he texted. Also, I've already spoken with a private security firm. We took no chances. Every vendor received direct instructions, no changes without our confirmation. We combed through the guest list and cross-checked every name. James even set up a code system for the reception seating. I knew my parents wouldn't give up quietly. And I was right. A week later, the event manager called. Hi, Leah. I just received a strange request. A man claiming to be your father asked to alter the seating chart and add a head table for the bride's family. I thanked her for calling. That's unauthorized. We have a password for a reason. But what followed chilled me more than any request. A text from my mother arrived not 10 minutes later. If you want to look like an ungrateful daughter in front of everyone, I'll make sure you do. I said nothing. But James saw the message and tightened his grip on my hand. You're not in this alone, he said. And this time, I believed him. With just 5 days left before the wedding, every morning began the same way, notifications. Dozens. Caleb was relentless. His texts were a scattered storm of jabs, accusations, and thinly veiled threats. One minute he mocked my independence, the next he demanded to know what roles the family would have in the ceremony. Meanwhile, my parents had shifted to emails. Long-winded monologues laced with childhood photos, me holding Caleb's hand at the zoo, our family decorating a Christmas tree, images they seemed to believe could rewrite history. But instead of guilt, all I felt was clarity. For the first time, I wasn't waking up in their shadow. I was building something of my own. Then, 3 days before the wedding, my phone rang with a name I hadn't seen in years, Madison. We were lab partners sophomore year but hadn't spoken since graduation. Leah, she said, hesitant. I wasn't sure if I should call, but I saw something weird. I stood by the window, sunlight warming the wooden floor beneath me. What kind of weird? There are Facebook posts. Your family saying you're spiraling. That you're not thinking straight. Something about stress and pushing people away. I thought you should know. My stomach twisted. I opened Facebook, even though I'd long since unfollowed nearly every relative. But there it was, my mother's public post, dated just hours earlier. It's devastating to watch your daughter push away everyone who loves her. We raised her with nothing but care, but she's lost herself. We pray she finds her way back before it's too late. Hundreds of likes. Dozens of comments calling me a poor, confused girl, clearly in distress, needing help. Not one person asked what might have pushed me this far. James walked in with his phone in hand, his expression tight. Caleb just called the church, he said. Claimed to be your brother and tried to add 30 extra guests, distant cousins apparently. I froze. They're escalating. Yup, James said calmly, opening his laptop. Time to lock everything down. That night, we called an emergency meeting with the security team. Our wedding was supposed to be intimate, peaceful. But now? It felt like we were planning a perimeter. We implemented QR code check-ins. Hired plainclothes security. Gave every vendor strict instructions to reject last-minute changes unless approved by James or me directly. The next morning, I received an email from an anonymous address. Subject: Family is forever. You think you're above the people who gave you life? If you go through with this, don't be surprised when your wedding becomes a public spectacle. The town will remember it, not for love but disgrace. Attached was a photo of James and me at a wedding dress fitting, taken from behind a window, grainy and distant. My heart pounded. I forwarded the email to James. He replied instantly. I'm handling it. That afternoon, his lawyer sent over a file, a restraining order drafted and ready. If anyone crossed the line, they'd face legal consequences. We weren't backing down. This wasn't just about a wedding anymore. It was about finally drawing the line they'd crossed one too many times. Any attempt to trespass, disrupt the ceremony, or publicly slander us would now trigger immediate legal action. James didn't say much about it, he never did. But the way he quietly arranged everything, step by step, made me feel safer than any speech or promise ever could. The night before the wedding, I sat alone on the small balcony of our rented cabin in Black Mountain. Below, the town glowed softly, warm porch lights, cars moving like shadows, and a sky just dim enough to remind me how far I'd come. My family had gone quiet again. No congratulations. No warm wishes. Just cryptic messages and blame. She's ruining everything. Your mother's heart can't take this. They spun their narrative as if pain had only just entered the picture, ignoring the years I had been expected to carry it alone. But I didn't respond. Explanations had long stopped working. People believe whatever makes them feel comfortable. The morning arrived with cool air and soft sunshine, rare for early spring in the mountains. The venue, a private garden just outside Asheville, was decorated with gentle greens, ivory ribbons, and wildflowers picked from the hills nearby. I stepped out of the car in my dress, holding the hem delicately, heart surprisingly steady. James was already there, greeting guests, checking last-minute details, always one step ahead. His parents welcomed everyone like it was second nature, kind smiles, warm hugs, not a trace of judgment. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one managing the chaos alone. Just as I started walking toward the cottage where I'd wait until the ceremony, the head of security approached with a firm but respectful nod. Miss Leah. They've arrived. I didn't have to ask who. At the front gate stood my parents and Caleb, dressed like they belonged there. My father wore the same navy blazer he had once called too good for casual events. My mother, of course, wore her signature teal. And Caleb hoodie, sneakers, arms crossed, chin high like he owned the world. They spoke to security, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. We're her family, Mom barked. You can't keep us from her wedding. The security manager turned to me. James stood beside me, calm as ever. It's your decision, he said. Whatever you choose, we stand with you. I inhaled. Stick to the list. No entry. Security didn't flinch. Dad demanded. Mom dramatized. Caleb scoffed, tossing barbed words like confetti. She thinks she's somebody now. She'll regret this. But none of it mattered. I turned away. The quartet began to play. And I walked down the aisle, each step lighter, not because of the dress, but because I finally knew I wasn't walking away from them. I was walking toward myself. It wasn't the silk of the dress or the applause that made my steps light, it was the weight I had finally laid down. The lifelong burden of impossible expectations from people who should have nurtured me, not silenced me. For so many years I had chased their approval, convinced that if I just tried harder, loved louder, they'd finally see me. But I now understood, that door had always been closed. And it wasn't mine to open. At the end of the aisle, James stood waiting, steady as ever. His smile didn't waver. It didn't ask for anything. It simply welcomed me. The ceremony unfolded like a quiet, sacred moment. No unexpected drama, no backhanded comments. Just warmth. Just love. Everyone who truly mattered was there. They clapped. They cried. They saw me not as the daughter who should have understood, but as a woman who had fought to reclaim her own story. When the officiant finally said, "It's my joy to present Mr. and Mrs. James and Leah Ellis," the applause rolled through the garden like wind through trees, full, alive, unrestrained. Outside the gates, beyond the stone-lined path, I saw them. My parents stood there unmoving. Caleb was gone. Maybe he left when the ceremony began, maybe he had never really wanted to come. But my mother and father remained, watching with a mixture of disbelief and loss etched on their faces. They looked like strangers who had stumbled into a place they no longer recognized. And I didn't go to them. Not from cruelty. Not from vengeance. But because walking toward them would mean turning away from everything I had built. Peace, self-worth, truth. James held my hand as we left the ceremony, the music echoing softly behind us. That night, we sat on the rooftop of a small lodge in Weaverville, sipping warm tea beneath string lights. Below, James's family chatted around a fire, voices rising in laughter, their silhouettes gentle and easy. No one asked about my parents. No one whispered, where were they? And I was thankful for that silence. Later, as the stars blinked awake, my phone buzzed. It was from Caleb. Subject: better late than never. I opened it, slow and steady. Leah. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But I understand now why you did what you did today. I've spent the last few weeks thinking about that camera, about everything I said just to feel bigger. I've signed up for therapy. I don't expect a response. But standing outside those gates, I finally understood what it's like to be erased from your own life. I stared at the message for a long time. James didn't ask what it said. He just took my hand gently as always. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel relieved either. Just clear. Because some apologies come not from new understanding, but from the shock of consequences. They come when it's far too late to matter. Quietly, I opened my phone. And blocked Caleb. Then Mom. Then Dad. Not out of hate, but because peace deserves protection too. No more voicemails at midnight. No more drawn-out emails full of guilt. No more last-ditch texts disguised as concern. When I finally hit block on each of their names, I thought it might feel harsh. But instead, it felt like breathing for the first time in weeks. It wasn't a violent break. It was freedom. I didn't carry hate in my heart, just the quiet conviction that they no longer had a seat at my table. The next morning, James and I packed our bags and slipped out of Asheville before sunrise. No send-off, no lingering farewells. We drove east until the mountains flattened and the air turned salty. A sleepy little town along the Carolina coast became our escape. Here, no one knew my name. No one asked what had happened with my family. The shopkeeper smiled kindly, talked about the weather, or recommended the best place for cinnamon rolls. During long walks by the dunes, James and I talked about little things: a new thrift store we'd spotted, a stray cat who kept visiting the cottage porch, the kind of plants we wanted on our apartment balcony back home. There were no loaded silences. No minefields of expectation. Just mornings filled with quiet laughter and afternoons spent letting the sea carry old thoughts away. When we finally returned to Asheville, it wasn't with heaviness. It was with resolve. The first thing I did was open the storage box tucked beneath our bed. Inside were the remnants of my former life, childhood photos, birthday cards never signed with love, scribbled notes from years ago that once meant everything. This time I didn't read them. I just let them go. James helped me sort through it all. No judgment. Just presence. When we sealed the last box and tucked it deep into a closet, he smiled and said, "Now there's room for what actually matters." He was right. That wedding hadn't just marked a commitment, it had drawn a line in the sand. A boundary that wouldn't be crossed again. I had learned how to protect my peace and his. A week later, we boarded a flight headed across the ocean. Our honeymoon destination, a quiet stretch of cliffs and sun-drenched rooftops in Greece. Not because of postcards or social media reels. Because I wanted to stand somewhere where no one had ever heard of Leah Monroe, the dutiful daughter, the responsible sister, the girl who was always told to understand. I wanted to stand on stone steps looking down at the Aegean Sea and feel fully that I was finally starting from zero. And Santorini welcomed me with sunlight and salt air, its whitewashed houses glowing in the morning light, as if they too understood what it meant to begin again. James reached across the table, his hand closing gently around mine. I know you don't always speak your heart aloud, he said, but just for today, hold on to this moment. Not for me, for you. I didn't answer right away. My eyes drifted toward the sea, glittering under the late afternoon sun. There were 1,000 thoughts swirling in my mind, but none of them made it to my lips. I simply nodded and let out a quiet breath. I used to believe happiness was something you earned by being good enough, by checking all the boxes. Be helpful. Be quiet. Be steady. Be selfless. That's what I thought it took to be loved. I squeezed his hand, my voice firmer now. But happiness is knowing how to say no to people who don't know how to value you. James didn't reply, but the smile that reached his eyes told me he heard every word. The days that followed were slow and soft. We slept in past sunrise, wandered cobbled streets without direction, took photos with no filters, no captions. We ate far too much gelato, held hands like teenagers, and let silence fill the space between conversations, not because we had nothing to say, but because we didn't have to say anything at all. At night, we'd sit on the little terrace, watching the Aegean sky bleed into gold and indigo. Time didn't push us. The world no longer demanded anything of me. For the first time, I wasn't trying to prove I belonged. I simply existed. And it was enough. When we returned to Asheville, life picked up again. My studio calendar filled with bookings, engagements, elopements, newborn shoots. Couples came not because I had a massive following, but because they trusted how I saw love, quiet, real, unfiltered. James remained my anchor, never loud, never performative. We weren't a picture-perfect couple online. But in the quiet spaces of our home, in the way he always showed up without asking for praise, I knew I had chosen well. One slow Sunday afternoon, while cleaning out my workspace, I came across the second-hand camera I bought after Caleb stole the first. I held it for a moment, tracing the worn grip, the little scratch near the shutter. And I smiled. No bitterness. No grief. Just pride. Pride in the girl who kept going. Pride in the woman who finally knew what she was worth. And most of all, peace. A quiet kind that came not from cutting people off, but from cutting loose the weight they placed on me. The Leah I am today doesn't live for permission. She lives for truth. And that's not just a story about a wedding without her family. It's the story of becoming free. Because boundaries aren't built from hate. They're built from hope for something better. For yourself. And the life you finally choose to protect. They're about protecting your peace and honoring your worth. Not everyone is capable of loving you the way you deserve, but that doesn't mean you have to carry their weight. Everyone has the right to choose who walks beside them through life's most meaningful moments. Just like Leah, sometimes true happiness begins when you finally say no to what's been holding you back. What do you think about Leah's journey? Did she make the right choice in choosing her own peace? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt stories like this one.